3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother's voice turned my apartment into an icebox with a single sentence: "Don't come home. Delaney doesn't want you there." I stared at the non-refundable plane ticket to Grand Rapids, realizing my seat at the table had been revoked to keep the peace. I thought hitting rock bottom would be eating alone. But the truth was sharper. I was not a daughter anymore. I was just an inconvenience they finally decided to delete. My name is Isla Watson. I am 34 years old. I live in a fourth-floor apartment in Minneapolis that smells faintly of vanilla and old paper, a scent I cultivated to cover up the smell of loneliness that seems to seep out of the drywall in the Midwest winter. I was standing over an open suitcase, performing the annual ritual of folding my life into neat, acceptable squares, preparing to fly back to Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was a Tuesday. Thanksgiving was exactly 2 days away. I have always been a packer who prepares for judgment. I was not just packing clothes. I was packing armor. I chose the beige sweater because my mother, Marla, once said blue made me look washed out. I packed the stiff, uncomfortable trousers because my sister, Delaney, had made a comment 3 years ago about my jeans being too trying hard for a woman my age. I was curating a version of myself that was quiet, neutral, and small, a version that might, just might, slip through the holiday weekend without triggering a landmine. It was the habit of a lifetime, the desperate, pathetic attempt to be loved by people who viewed my existence as an administrative error they were too polite to correct. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was 7 in the evening. The screen lit up with the word "Mom." I felt that familiar spike of cortisol, the chemical kick that had defined my relationship with her since I was old enough to understand tone of voice. I slid the answer icon across the glass. I did not get a chance to say hello. "Don't come home," Marla said. Her voice was not angry. Anger would have implied passion, or at least that I mattered enough to upset her. Her voice was flat, smooth, and utterly final. It was the voice one uses to tell a telemarketer to remove a number from a list. I froze, holding a pair of wool socks in midair. The heating vent in the corner rattled, a sound that suddenly seemed deafening in the silence. "What?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, like a child's. I said, "Don't come home. Isla, Delaney doesn't want you there." The socks fell from my hand. They hit the bottom of the suitcase with a soft thud. I stared at them, trying to process the syntax of the sentence. "Delaney doesn't want you there. Not we have a problem. Not there is an emergency." Delaney, my younger sister by 2 years, the sun around which the Watson planetary system revolved. "I have a ticket," I said. It was a stupid thing to say. It was a practical objection to an emotional execution. "The flight is on Thursday morning." "Eat the cost," Marla said. "Or get a credit. I don't know how airlines work these days." "Why?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Mom, why I haven't seen you guys in 6 months. I bought gifts. I took time off work." "You know how Delaney gets," Marla sighed. It was a heavy theatrical sigh, the kind that signaled she was the one suffering. She was the martyr mediating between nations. "She is very stressed right now. Her job, the house, everything. She is fragile, Isla. And having you there, it changes the energy." "The energy," I repeated. "You make her anxious," Marla said. She said it as a fact, like gravity or taxes. "You walk in and you have this air about you. You are always waiting for something to go wrong, and it makes everyone on edge. You are too intense. Delaney needs a peaceful Thanksgiving. She explicitly asked me to handle this." "Handle this," I whispered. "I am your daughter." "Don't start," Marla snapped, her tone sharpening instantly. "This is exactly what I am talking about. The drama, the victimization. You always make it about you. If you really cared about this family, you would understand that sometimes you just need to step back for the greater good. Don't cause a scene. Isla, just stay in Minneapolis." The line went dead. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say she was sorry. She just hung up, having completed her task. I stood there for a long time. The apartment was completely silent. The The beige sweater looked ridiculous folded there in the suitcase. A peace offering that had been rejected before it was even delivered. I needed to verify it. I needed to hear it from the other half of the equation. I dialed my father. Dennis. He answered on the fourth ring. I could hear the hum of a power saw in the background, likely from his workshop in the garage. He always retreated to the garage when the tension inside the house became too thick to breathe. "Dad," I said. "Isla," he said. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had been beaten down by decades of small, imperceptible defeats. "I can't talk long. Your mother is calling me for dinner." "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know she was going to call me and tell me not to come?" There was a pause. The saw in the background had stopped, leaving a static hum. "Isla," he said, and the way he said my name was an apology and a dismissal all wrapped in one. "You know how your sister is. She's going through a rough patch. I am 34 years old. Dad, I am spending Thanksgiving alone because Delaney is stressed. Since when is her stress more important than my presence?" "Lower your voice," he whispered, likely looking toward the door connecting the garage to the kitchen. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Your mother thinks it is best. Just sit this one out, honey. Maybe Christmas. Okay, listen to your mother. It's just easier that way. It is just easier that way." That was the epitaph of my relationship with my father. He was a good man in theory, but in practice, he was a ghost. He had traded his spine for a quiet life. "Dad," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to remain comprised of steel. "Please, I don't want to be alone on Thanksgiving. I have to go. Isla, Marla is yelling." He hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at the black screen. The rejection was not a sudden knife wound. It was an old ache, a fracture that had never healed, simply re-breaking along the exact same line. My mind, traitorous and quick, flashed back to the evidence I had spent years trying to suppress. I was 16 years old. It was my sweet 16 party. We had rented the back room of a pizza place. I had invited 20 friends. The entire evening became a saga of finding an emergency manicurist, of ice packs, of cooing over her pain. My champagne went warm on the counter. When I tried to bring up my job later, Marla had shushed me. "Not now." "Isla, can't you see your sister is upset? Read the room." I was always the static. Delaney was the signal. I was the rough draft. She was the masterpiece that required constant preservation. I had been taught, lesson by brutal lesson, that my emotions were a nuisance, a burden, a tax on the family's limited emotional budget. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I opened the Delta Airlines app on my phone. There it was, the QR code. Grand Rapids. Seat 12A. I stared at the cancel flight button. A warning popped up. "This ticket is non-refundable. You will receive an e-credit for future travel, minus a cancellation fee of $150. $150 to be told I was unwanted." I looked at the flight details. In the digital system of the airline, I was still a passenger. I had a seat. I had a meal preference. But in the real world, I had been erased. I felt like a line of code that had been backspaced out of a program for years. I had thought the problem was me. I thought if I was just a little more successful, a little quieter, a little more helpful, a little less intense, I would earn my seat. I thought love was a meritocracy, and I just wasn't working hard enough. But sitting there in the darkening Minneapolis afternoon, with the early winter gloom pressing against the glass, I finally saw the architecture of it. It wasn't about Thanksgiving. It wasn't about Delaney being stressed. It was about the structure. A family like ours dysfunctional, enmeshed, narcissistic needs a structure to survive. It needs a golden child to worship, and it needs a scapegoat to carry the sins. Delaney was the vessel for their hopes and their fragility. I was the vessel for their anxiety and their blame. If I went home, I would be miserable, tiptoeing around Delaney's moods, but by sending me away, they achieved something even better for themselves. They bonded. They would sit around that turkey on Thursday, united in their concern for difficult Isla, They would bond over how hard they tried with me, and how I just couldn't fit in. My absence was more valuable to them than my presence. I was the common enemy that kept their alliance strong. I looked at the suitcase. It was half full. I could call back. I could beg. I could drive 10 hours through the night and show up on the doorstep, forcing them to let me in. I could scream. I could demand fairness. But what is the value of a seat at a table where you are only tolerated? Never celebrated, a cold clarity washed over me. It was colder than the wind outside, but it was cleaner. It was the temperature of the truth. I stood up. I walked to the suitcase. I picked up the beige sweater. I unfolded it. I put it back in the drawer. I picked up the stiff trousers. I put them back on the hanger. I picked up the socks. I put them in the hamper. I was not going to Grand Rapids. I was not going to argue. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of hearing me cry again. If I begged, I validated their power. If I fought, I validated their label of me as the drama. The only winning move was to stop playing their game entirely. I picked up my phone. I did not text them. I did not send a sarcastic retort. I did not block them, not yet. That would be too emotional. I simply closed the Delta app. The apartment was dark now. The sun had set. I stood in the center of my living room, the silence ringing in my ears. I was alone. I would be alone on Thanksgiving. I would eat alone, but for the first time in 34 years, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. "Okay," I said aloud to the empty room. My voice was steady. "Okay. If they did not want me at their table, I would build my own. I would hew it out of rock and ice if I had to." I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Minneapolis, a city of strangers. I felt a strange, terrifying sensation in my chest. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being dropped after a 10-mile march. I would not call them on Thursday. I would not send a card. I would vanish from their narrative, just as they requested, but I would not vanish from my own. "I will live," I whispered to the glass, watching my own reflection, as if I am worth choosing. I turned away from the window, leaving the curtains open. I was hungry, and I had 3 days to figure out how to be a person who belonged to herself. Thanksgiving morning arrived not with the smell of roasting turkey, but with the muffled sound of my upstairs neighbors vibrating through the ceiling. I could hear the heavy thud of footsteps, the shrill delight of a child screaming, and the low, rhythmic bass of a football game on a television turned up too loud. It was the soundtrack of belonging, lying in my bed, staring at the cracks in the plaster that I had memorized over 3 years of insomnia. I felt the silence of my own apartment pressing against my eardrums like deep water. My phone sat on the nightstand. Face up, it was 10 in the morning. I had not touched it since waking, treating it like an unexploded ordnance. There were no missed calls. There were no texts. The silence was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating, against my better judgment, against every therapist's advice I had ever read in a magazine waiting room. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I told myself I just wanted to check the news, or the weather, or anything neutral. But the muscle memory of pain is fast. I opened the app. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, served it up immediately. It was the first post on my feed. It was a photo posted by Delaney 19 minutes ago. The caption read, "So incredibly blessed to have my whole world under one roof. Family is everything. Happy Thanksgiving from the Watsons," followed by a string of heart emojis and a praying hand symbol that felt like a slap. I zoomed in. They were in the living room, posing in front of the fireplace where my father hung the stockings every year. Marla was wearing a cream silk blouse, holding a glass of white wine, smiling that tight, curated smile she saved for the public. Dennis stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking weary but present. And front and center was Delaney, radiant in a deep red dress, her arm linked through the arm of her new fiancé. A man I had met only once, but it wasn't the faces that made my breath hitch. It was the dining room table visible in the background through the archway. It was set for 4. I counted them again, my finger tapping the cold glass screen. 1, 2, 3, 4. There was no empty chair. There was no gap where a sister should have been. The spacing was symmetrical, perfect, complete. They hadn't just uninvited me. They had closed ranks. The visual evidence was irrefutable. My absence was not a hole they were trying to fill. It was a correction they had finally made. I threw the phone onto the duvet. A hot, acidic wave of nausea rolled in my stomach. I could stay here. I could pull the covers over my head, order a pizza that would arrive cold, and watch movies until I fell asleep from exhaustion. That was the safe choice. That was what a victim would do. But as I looked at the gray light filtering through the blinds, I felt a spark of anger ignite in my chest. It was a small, dangerous flame. No, I thought, I am not going to hide. I threw off the covers. I showered in water that was almost too hot to stand. I put on makeup, not to cover my flaws, but to paint on a face that said I was fine. I dressed in a dark green coat that made me feel armored and wrapped a scarf around my neck. Minneapolis was cold, the air biting and crisp, smelling of snow that hadn't fallen yet. The streets were eerily empty. The city paused in a collective inhale of gratitude. I walked 4 blocks to the River District, my boots clicking on the pavement. I found Riverside and Ash by accident. It was one of the few places with lights on, a warm golden glow spilling out onto the sidewalk. It was a classic Midwestern supper club, the kind with dark wood paneling and brass fixtures, a place that felt like it had existed since the 1950s. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The smell hit me instantly: sage, melted butter, roasted meat, and the sharp tang of cranberry. It was the scent of a memory I didn't actually have, a nostalgic hallucination of a holiday I had never truly experienced without anxiety. The hostess was a young woman with tired eyes, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. "Just one?" she asked, her pen hovering over the seating chart. "Just one," I said. I tried to make my voice sound breezy, like this was a chic, independent choice, not a last resort. She led me through the bustling dining room. We passed large round tables filled with loud families, couples holding hands across white tablecloths, and groups of friends toasting with wine. We walked past the fireplace. We walked past the window seats with the view of the river. She stopped at a small, 2-top table, squeezed between a pillar and the swinging door of the kitchen. It was the table you gave to people you wanted to forget. Every time the kitchen door swung open, a blast of steam and noise would hit me. Every time a waiter rushed by, the breeze would ruffle my napkin. "Here you are," she said, placing a menu down. "Thank you," I said. I sat down, keeping my coat on for a moment, feeling exposed. I was a rock in a stream of happy people. To my left, across the narrow aisle, was a large, round booth occupied by a family that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room in the best possible way. There were 6 of them. At the head of the table sat a woman who looked like she could run a Fortune 500 company or bake a prize-winning pie. Possibly in the same afternoon. This was Diane Carlisle. She had silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a blazer that looked expensive and a scarf that looked chaotic. Next to her was a man with kind shoulders and a beard that was mostly salt, listening to a younger woman tell a story with wild hand gestures. And facing me, though he wasn't looking at me, was a man who looked to be about 36. He was wearing a charcoal sweater. He wasn't talking. While the rest of his table was a cacophony of overlapping stories and laughter, he was still. He was peeling the label off his beer bottle with surgical precision, his eyes scanning the room, observing everything but participating in nothing. I quickly looked down at my menu, the text blurred: roasted turkey, prime rib, butternut squash ravioli. A waiter appeared, breathless. "Can I get you a drink to start?" "A glass of Pinot Noir," I said, "and I'll order the turkey dinner." "Coming right up," when the food arrived. It looked perfect. It was a plate straight out of a magazine. The turkey was glistening. The mashed potatoes were a cloud of white. The green beans were bright. It was exactly what I was supposed to want. I picked up my fork. The noise of the restaurant swelled clinking silverware, jazz music, the roar of conversation. I cut a small piece of turkey. I raised it to my mouth, and then my throat closed. It wasn't a cough. It was a physiological rejection. The grief I had packed down, the anger I had folded away like those sweaters in my suitcase, suddenly expanded in my chest. I thought about the 4 chairs in Grand Rapids. I thought about Marla's voice saying, "Don't cause a scene." I thought about the fact that I was 34 years old and sitting by a kitchen door paying $40 to eat a bird that tasted like sawdust because nobody loved me enough to set a plate for me. I put the fork down. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my water glass. My hand trembling so hard, water sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. "Don't cry," I commanded myself. "Do not cry in the middle of a steakhouse. Do not be the pathetic woman eating alone on Thanksgiving." But the tears were not listening to logic. They welled up, hot and fast, blurring the candlelight. One escaped, tracking down my cheek. Then another. I pressed my napkin to my face, pretending to wipe my mouth, my shoulders shaking with the effort of holding it in. "Excuse me." The voice was close. I froze. The napkin still covering my mouth. I looked up. The woman from the next table, Diane, was standing over me, up close. She was intimidating. She had intelligent lines around her eyes and a gaze that felt like a scanner reading a barcode. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. She was just looking. "I'm fine," I choked out, my voice thick and wet. I have allergies. Something in the spices." It was a terrible lie. It was the kind of lie a child tells when they are standing over a broken vase. Diane didn't blink. She looked at my untouched plate. She looked at my red eyes. She looked at the single glass of wine. "Honey," she said, her voice dropping an octave, cutting through the ambient noise of the room. "Allergies make you sneeze. Allergies don't make you cry into your mashed potatoes on the one day of the year everyone needs to feel like they belong somewhere." I stared at her, stunned into silence. My defense mechanisms, usually so sharp, failed completely. She gestured toward her booth. "My husband Frank is telling a story I have heard 40 times. My son is analyzing the structural integrity of his dinner roll. We have an extra chair because my daughter-in-law has the flu and stayed in Chicago. You are coming to sit with us." "I can't," I stammered, wiping my eyes frantically. "I don't want to intrude. I'm a stranger. I'm a mess." "We are all a mess," Diane said firmly. "We just have better lighting at our table. Now, stand up. No one should eat alone today. It is bad for the digestion." She didn't wait for permission. She signaled to the waiter, pointing at my plate, and then at her table. The waiter, clearly terrified of her, immediately swooped in to move my setting. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I felt like I was in a dream. I followed this formidable stranger across the aisle. At the booth, the family stopped talking. Frank, the man with the kind shoulders, looked up and smiled, as if he had been expecting me all along. "We have a recruit," Diane announced, sliding into the booth and patting the empty space next to the quiet man in the charcoal sweater. "Everyone, make room." The physical act of them shifting was what broke me a little more. They didn't just scoot over, they reorganized. Frank moved his coat. The younger woman moved her purse. They created a physical void for me to fill. Without hesitation, without a family conference, without assessing if I was worthy of the space, I sat down. The leather of the booth was warm. I was sitting next to the man, Stanley. He smelled of cedar and something clean, like rain. He turned to look at me, up close. His eyes were a dark, thoughtful brown. He didn't offer a fake smile. He didn't ask my name or demand to know why I was crying. He saw that I was still clutching my wet, crumpled napkin in a fist, my knuckles white. Without a word, he reached across the table and took a fresh, crisp linen napkin from the center stack. He handed it to me. I took it, my hand brushing his for a fraction of a second. His skin was cool. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm usually more pleasant than this." Stanley looked at me. He looked right at the smudge of mascara under my left eye. He didn't look away. "Here," he said, his voice low and rough, barely audible over the restaurant noise, but clear enough that I heard every syllable. "Here, no one needs you to be pleasant to sit down." He picked up his fork and returned to his meal, as if he hadn't just dismantled my entire belief system with 12 words. I unfolded the napkin. I placed it on my lap. To my right, Diane was already pouring wine into my glass, asking me if I preferred white or dark meat. To my left, Stanley was eating calmly, a solid, silent presence blocking me from the rest of the room. For the first time in 3 days, the knot in my chest loosened. I picked up my fork, and for the first time in my life, I took a bite of Thanksgiving dinner that didn't taste like I had to apologize for eating it. The transition from the warm, golden bubble of Riverside and Ash back to the cold reality of a Minneapolis winter night was jarring. We walked out into the parking lot, the wind whipping our coats, and I expected the magic to dissolve. I expected the Carlyles to nod politely, wish me a nice life, and get into their cars, leaving me to become a stranger again. That was how transactional relationships worked. You shared a meal, you split the check, you moved on. But Diane Carlyle did not operate on transactions. She operated on momentum. She dug into her purse, a cavernous leather bag that seemed to hold everything from breath mints to legal briefs, and pulled out a card. She didn't hand it to me. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. "Sunday," she said. 6 o'clock. We do a roast. It is usually overcooked because Frank gets distracted by the game, but the company is decent." "Oh, I couldn't," I started, the automatic reflex of refusal kicking in. "You have done enough. I don't want to intrude on your family time." Frank leaned in, wrapping a thick wool scarf around his neck. "It is not an intrusion. It is a rule, the stray cat protocol, we call it. Once you have been fed, you have to come back for seconds to prove you didn't get food poisoning. Besides, Stanley needs someone else to talk to. He is tired of hearing me explain the defensive line strategy of the Vikings." Stanley, standing a few feet away near a black sedan, looked up. He didn't smile, but the corner of his eye crinkled. It was a micro-expression of agreement. "The roast is dry," he said. "Bring sauce." I stood there in the parking lot, clutching the card, watching their taillights fade into the darkness. When I got back to my apartment, I looked at the card under the harsh light of my kitchen. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, Diane Carlyle, mediator, family law consultant, Rhett. On the back, in messy blue ink, she had written an address in St. Paul and a phone number. For the next 2 days, I agonized. My upbringing had taught me that generosity always came with a bill. If someone gave you dinner, they wanted a favor. If someone invited you over, they wanted an audience. I sat on my couch, dissecting the interaction, looking for the trap. I waited for a text asking for money, or a multi-level marketing pitch, or a request to babysit. But Saturday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a demand. It was a photo. It was a picture of a very ugly, very burnt loaf of bread sitting on a counter. The text from Diane read, "Frank tried to bake. We are going to need backup. Sunday is still on. Don't feel like you have to dress up. We are pajama-adjacent people." I stared at the screen. Pajama-adjacent. No guilt, no pressure, just a burnt loaf of bread and an open door. I went. The Carlyle house in St. Paul was everything my apartment was not. It was a sprawling Victorian structure that looked like it was held together by vines and willpower. When I walked up the porch steps on Sunday evening, I could hear shouting from inside. My stomach clenched. Shouting in the Watson house meant doors were about to slam. Shouting in the Watson house meant someone had failed. I almost turned around, but then the door swung open before I could knock. "She is here," Frank bellowed over his shoulder, wearing an apron that said, "Grill Sergeant." "Saved by the Belle Diane. Get the wine." I stepped inside, and the sensory overload was immediate. The air smelled of garlic, rosemary, and wood smoke. The hallway was cluttered with boots and coats, not hidden away in closets, but piled in a cheerful mound of life. The shouting I had heard was coming from the living room, where a large television was broadcasting a football game. "He was out of bounds," a teenage boy yelled at the screen. "He was not. He has toes like a ballerina," a younger girl yelled back. They weren't fighting. They were participating. Diane emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked less imposing in a sweater and jeans, but her eyes were still sharp. "You came," she said. "Good. Here." She handed me a glass of red wine before I had even taken my coat off. "Come to the kitchen. It is the only place where we can hear ourselves think." I followed her. The kitchen was chaos, but it was a functional chaos. There were pots bubbling, vegetables scattered on a cutting board, and music playing from a small speaker. "Can I help?" I asked, falling into my default role of trying to earn my keep. "I can chop. I can wash." "You can sit," Diane said, pointing to a stool. "Or you can stir the gravy if it makes you feel less anxious. You have busy hands. I can tell. You don't know what to do with them unless you are working." I picked up the wooden spoon, grateful for the task. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, you entered the room like you were waiting for a performance review," Diane said, tasting the sauce. "Relax. We are not grading you." Stanley walked in a moment later. He was carrying a bag of ice. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, looking more rugged than he had in the restaurant. He nodded at me. "You brought sauce." "I brought wine," I said. "Acceptable," he said. He dumped the ice into a cooler. Over the next 3 hours, I felt my internal wiring begin to fray and re-knit in strange ways. We sat at a long, scratched wooden table that had clearly seen 1,000 dinners. The food was passed around family-style bowls of mashed potatoes, platters of roast beef that was, as predicted, slightly dry, and a salad that nobody touched. I sat next to Stanley. He didn't talk much, but he passed me the salt before I even reached for it. He refilled my water glass without asking. It was a quiet, observant care that felt unsettlingly intimate. "So," I said, trying to make conversation during a lull in the football debate. "Carlisle, but you are Stanley Holt." I had noticed the name on a piece of mail on the counter. Stanley paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Frank at the head of the table. Frank was currently demonstrating a pass interference call with a breadstick. "Diane is my mother," Stanley said. "Frank is my stepfather. My biological father left when I was 4. I kept his name, mostly out of habit, but Frank raised me. He has been here since Stanley was 7, Diane added, spearing a carrot. "We are a patchwork quilt. Isla, some of us are original fabric. Some of us are patches sewn on later to cover the holes. But we keep each other warm." "Frank taught me how to shave," Stanley said, looking at the older man with a gaze that held zero resentment. "And he taught me how to lose money on poker. We chose each other. The paperwork just came later." We chose each other. The phrase stuck in my throat. I looked at Frank, who was now laughing at something the teenage boy, Stanley's nephew, I realized had said. There was no tension. There was no hierarchy of who loved whom more. It was just easy. "I don't understand," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The wine had loosened my filter. The table went quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet, the listening kind. "Understand what?" Diane asked gently. "How you can all be so." I searched for the word. Loud, and yet nobody is mad in my house. If my father raised his voice like Frank just did, my mother would go silent for 3 days. If I spilled wine like your grandson just did, I would be lectured on clumsiness for an hour. I hadn't meant to say it. I froze, waiting for the pity. Diane put down her fork. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Isla," she said, "your family sounds exhausting." It wasn't pity. It was validation. "They are," I whispered. "I was uninvited to Thanksgiving because my sister thought my presence was too stressful, because I am drama." "Ah," Diane said. A knowing look passed between her and Frank. "The drama label. I used to see that a lot in my practice. Your practice. I was a family mediator for 30 years, Diane said. I handled divorces, custody battles, inheritance wars, and let me tell you a secret about the person the family calls drama. She took a sip of her wine. The person they call drama is usually the only person who is reacting normally to a sick situation, she said. If you are the only one screaming fire in a burning house, the people who want to burn will call you crazy. They call you drama because you are the one pointing out the things they are hiding. It is a defense mechanism. If they discredit the witness, they don't have to listen to the testimony. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but this time I didn't fight them. I just wanted a seat at the table. You have one, Stanley said. He didn't look up from his plate, but his voice was solid as concrete. You are sitting in it, and nobody here is going to ask you to leave just because you have feelings. Suddenly, a small hand tugged on my sleeve. It was the little girl, maybe 5 years old. She was holding a plastic dinosaur. Aunt Isla, she said, stumbling over the name but using it with the casual confidence of a child. Can you open this? It stuck. Aunt Isla. She didn't know me. She didn't know my history. She just saw a woman at the table and assumed I belonged there. I took the dinosaur. My hands were shaking, but I popped the battery compartment open. There you go, I said. Thanks, she chirped, and ran off. I stayed late. We played a board game called Ticket to Ride, and Frank taught me how to block Stanley's train routes. For the first time in my life, I played a game to have fun, not to avoid losing. I laughed. I laughed until my stomach hurt. When I finally left, it was nearly 11 o'clock. Stanley walked me to my car. The street was quiet, snow flurries starting to dance in the streetlight beams. You okay to drive? He asked. I'm fine, I said. Thank you. For everything. I don't know how to repay you. Stop trying to pay, Stanley said. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked at me, his dark eyes serious. Just show up next Sunday. That's the only currency we accept here. I drove home in a daze. The apartment, when I entered it, felt different. It was still quiet, still empty, but it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a sanctuary I returned to, not a hole I was stuck in. I was brushing my teeth, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I looked younger. The tension lines around my mouth had softened. I felt a strange, terrifying sensation, peace. It was scary because I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, my phone chimed on the bathroom counter. It wasn't a text from Diane. It wasn't a text from the Watsons. It was an email notification from Credit Karma. The subject line read, New account alert. A new personal loan has been opened in your name. I froze, the toothbrush hanging from my mouth. I spat and grabbed the phone. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, the warm glow of the evening evaporating instantly. I opened the app. Lender Quick Cash Horizons. Amount $5,000. Date opened yesterday. I stared at the screen. I hadn't applied for a loan. I hadn't signed anything. I had been sitting in my apartment, staring at a business card, while someone, somewhere, was using my name to borrow money. I looked at the date again. Yesterday, the day after Thanksgiving, a cold dread, sharper than the winter wind, coiled in my stomach. Diane's words echoed in my head. They call you drama, because you are the one pointing out the things they are hiding. I wasn't just deleted from the family. Someone was using my ghost. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my apartment. It was 3 a.m. on a Monday. The warmth of the Carlisle family dinner had evaporated, replaced by the cold, sterile blue light of financial forensics. I was not sleeping. I was digging. After the email from Credit Karma, I had paid $40 to download my full credit reports from all 3 major bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I spread them out across my dual monitor setup, the same way I organized crisis management strategies for my clients at Larkspur Communications Group. I was good at my job because I knew how to find the narrative hidden in data, And the narrative staring back at me from these PDF files was a horror story. The $5,000 loan from Quick Cash Horizons was just the headline. Underneath, in the sections for closed accounts and soft inquiries, there was a history of erosion. I found a Buy Now, Pay Later account opened 2 years ago for a purchase of $600 at a designer handbag website. It had been paid off. But late, leaving a ding on my score I hadn't noticed because I rarely checked the details. I found a utility bill for a cable company in a zip code I had never lived in. I found a credit card application from 4 years ago that had been denied. It looked like someone had been testing the fence. They were small, sporadic pings to see if the electric current was on, to see if I was watching. I picked up my phone. I needed to know where the $5,000 was going. I waited until 9 o'clock in the morning to call Quick Cash Horizons. I used my work voice, the one I used when telling a CEO that their reputation was about to tank if they didn't listen to me. "I am looking at a loan opened in my name," I told the representative, a woman named Brenda who sounded bored. "I did not open it. I need to know the address on file." "I can't give out account details without verification," Brenda said. "I can verify my social security number," I said, reciting the 9 digits that were supposed to be my unique identity. "I can verify my date of birth, but I cannot verify the address because I suspect it is fraudulent. If you don't give me the address so I can confirm it is not mine, I will be filing a police report that names your company as complicit in identity theft." There was a pause. The typing sound on her end stopped. "The address on file," Brenda said, her voice tighter, "is a P.O. Box 412. City, Grand Rapids, Michigan." My stomach dropped through the floor. Grand Rapids, my hometown. "Thank you," I said, and hung up. I sat back in my ergonomic office chair. My hands were trembling. A P.O. box. That was deliberate. That was calculated. Someone didn't want the mail going to a physical house where it might be seen by the wrong person, or where I might trace it to a specific doorstep. But Grand Rapids was not a coincidence. I opened a fresh Excel spreadsheet. I typed "timeline of theft" in the first cell. I began to cross-reference the dates of the suspicious activity with my personal calendar. Item 1. The handbag purchase, November 12th, 2 years ago. I checked my calendar. That was the week I had gone home for my father's 60th birthday. I had stayed at their house. I had left my purse in the guest room while we went out to dinner. Item 2. The denied credit card application, July 4th, 4 years ago. I was at a lake house with the family. Delaney had borrowed my laptop to look up a recipe. The pattern was sickeningly clear. The theft required proximity, or at least access to my data. But the new loan, the $5,000, was remote. They didn't need my physical wallet anymore. They had my numbers memorized. I needed help. I couldn't call the police yet. I didn't have a smoking gun. Just a pile of circumstantial ash. I called Diane. She answered on the first ring. "Isla, is everything okay?" "No," I said. "Someone in Grand Rapids just took out a $5,000 loan in my name, and I think I know who it is." "Come to the office," she said. Her voice had shifted. The warm maternal tone was gone, replaced by the steel of a woman who had spent 30 years in family court. "Bring everything. Do not call them. Do not text them. Just come." Diane's office was a small, converted brownstone in St. Paul when I arrived. Frank was there, too. He wasn't wearing his apron. He was wearing a suit, looking like the retired accountant he was. Sitting with them was a man I didn't know, a guy with a buzz cut and eyes that looked like they had seen every scam in the book. "This is Gary," Frank said, gesturing to the man. "Gary used to work in fraud detection for Chase. He consults now." "Nice to meet you," Gary said, not offering a hand but nodding at my stack of papers. "Let's see the damage." I laid it out. The spreadsheet, the credit reports, the PKO, box number. Gary scanned the documents with terrifying speed. "Classic familiar fraud," he said, tapping the paper. "It is the dirtiest secret in banking. Strangers steal your credit card to buy a TV, Family members steal your identity to live a life they can't afford. They have your social. They know your mother's maiden name because it is their name. They know the name of your first pet. Security questions are a joke when the thief raised you. I think it's my sister, I said. The words tasted like bile. She has always been entitled. She just got engaged. Maybe she needs money for the wedding. She loves expensive things. Let's check the digital footprint, Gary said. You said you have the loan application timestamp. Yes, Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Gary pulled out a laptop. If they applied online, they left an IP address. The bank has it. We can't legally hack the bank, but I can help you draft a demand letter that forces them to release the metadata attached to the electronic signature. We spent the next 3 hours building a fortress. Diane helped me draft affidavits for the credit bureaus. Frank helped me set up a credit freeze that locked my financial identity in a block of ice. No one could open a lemonade stand in my name without a PIN code that was now stored in Frank's physical safe. We need to link the P.O. box to a person, Gary said, or the IP address to a location. I logged into my old email account, the one I shared with the family years ago for streaming services. I dug through the login history of our shared Netflix account. It was a long shot, but people are creatures of habit. I found a login from Sunday at 4 o'clock. Device iPhone 15 Pro. Location Grand Rapids. MI. IP address. Ending in .442. That's the device, I said. Delaney has an iPhone 15 Pro. She bragged about it on Instagram. It's circumstantial, Diane warned, but it is strong. Then, my phone buzzed on the mahogany conference table. The screen lit up. Delaney. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to her in months. I hadn't told anyone about the investigation. Read it, Diane commanded. Do not reply. I picked up the phone. The text was short. Hey, Mom said you aren't coming for Thanksgiving. Probably for the best. Heard you're having a hard time at work. Don't worry about gifts this year. Just focus on yourself. Don't make everything a mess like you usually do. She knows, I whispered. How does she know? She doesn't know you know, Gary said. She is fishing, or she is projecting. Don't make a mess is the subconscious telling on itself. She is nervous. She is gaslighting you, Diane said. She is planting the narrative that you are unstable, that you are having a hard time, so if you suddenly accuse her of theft, she can tell everyone you are having a breakdown. It is evil, I said. It is strategic, Diane corrected, and it is why you cannot confront her until you have the nail in the coffin. Gary looked up from his screen. We can get the audio, he said. What, Mo? The loan company. Gary explained. These predatory lenders record everything for quality assurance. If the application was finalized over the phone, and often they call to verify the big loans, there is a voice recording. You are the account holder. Legally. That recording belongs to you. I called Brenda at Quick Cash Horizons back. This time, I didn't ask. I demanded. I cited the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I cited my right to access my own consumer file. Diane stood next to me, sliding index cards with legal statutes on them for me to read. Fine, Brenda said, sounding harassed. I can email you the verification file, but it is just a formality. The borrower answered all the security questions correctly. Send it, I said. We waited. The silence in the office was thick. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner felt like a countdown. 5 minutes later, an email appeared in my inbox. Attachment verification _call _5590.w AV. I moved the mouse cursor over the file. My hand was sweating. If I play this, I said, looking at Diane, and it is her voice, there is no going back. If I turn my sister into the police, I lose my parents forever. They will never forgive me. Diane looked at me with eyes that were sad but unyielding. Isla, look at the empty chair at their table. You have already lost them. The only question is whether you are going to let them keep the receipt for selling you out. She was right. They had already sold me. Now they were just collecting the cash. I clicked play. The audio crackled. Please state your full name for the record, a computerized voice said. Isla Marie Watson, a woman's voice answered. I stopped breathing. I knew that voice. It was burned into my neural pathways. It was the voice that had told me to sit up straight. It was the voice that had told me I was too intense. It was the voice that had told me, 3 days ago, Delaney doesn't want you there. It wasn't Delaney. Mother, I whispered. The recording continued. And please confirm your social security number, the operator said. 354. The voice recited my number with practiced ease. There was no hesitation. It was Marla, my mother. And the purpose of this loan? Medical expenses, Marla said smoothly. It has been a hard year. Okay. Ms. Watson, the funds will be deposited. Thank you, Marla said. And then, right before the recording cut off, she muttered something to someone in the background. It was faint, but the microphone picked it up. It is fine. Dennis, she never checks. Delaney needs the venue deposit more than Isla needs a credit score. The audio file ended. I sat frozen in the chair. The room spun. I had built a villain in my head. I thought it was Delaney, the spoiled sister, snatching what she wanted. But it wasn't the sister, it was the parent. Marla wasn't protecting Delaney from my drama. She was protecting Delaney's wedding budget using my financial future. She was cannibalizing one child to feed the other. It's Mom, I said. My voice sounded detached, like it was coming from another room. It's my mother. Frank let out a low breath. God almighty. Gary closed his laptop. Well, that is a felony, wire fraud, identity theft, and since she used the phone, it is federal. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was iron. Isla, she said. This is the moment. You have the smoking gun. But you need to understand what happens next. If you file this report, you aren't just creating a rift. You are dropping a bomb. They will hate you for this. They will say you are ungrateful. They will say you are sending your mother to jail over money. I looked at the screen, at the waveform of my mother's voice stealing my name. She never checks. Delaney needs it more. They didn't just not love me. They consumed me. I was a resource. I was livestock. I don't care if they hate me, I said. The tears didn't come. I was past tears. I was in a cold, hard place where only survival mattered. They have been hating me for free for 30 years. I am done paying them to do it. I looked at Gary. File it, I said. File everything. The week after I discovered my mother was the thief, my life did not explode into cinematic chaos. Instead, it dissolved into a mountain of paperwork. There were affidavits to sign, identity theft reports to file with the Federal Trade Commission, and letters to notarize. It was a slow, grinding war of bureaucracy. And surprisingly, Stanley Holt was the one in the trenches with me. I had expected him to fade into the background. We were not dating, not really. We were just two people who had sat next to each other at a few Sunday dinners. But when I told Diane I needed to sort through 5 years of bank statements to find every instance of fraud, Stanley showed up at my apartment door with a box of highlighters and 3 large black coffees. You don't have to do this, I told him, standing in the doorway, blocking his path. My apartment was a mess of papers. I was wearing sweatpants that I had worn for 2 days straight. This is ugly. Stanley, it is not a fun way to spend a Tuesday night. I like organization, he said simply, gently maneuvering around me to set the coffee on my kitchen counter. And I don't like bullies. Your mother is both a bully and a sloppy bookkeeper. Let's get to work. He didn't treat me like a victim. He treated me like a partner in a project. We sat on my living room floor for 4 hours, highlighting suspicious transactions. He didn't gasp or offer pity when we found a charge for a spa day in Grand Rapids on my credit card from 3 years ago. He just marked it in yellow and added it to the spreadsheet. Why are you doing this? I asked him around 10 o'clock. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the scratch of pens. You have a job. You have a life. You are scraping through the financial wreckage of a woman you barely know. Stanley capped his highlighter. He looked at me, and his gaze was steady, lacking the pity I hated so much. I know what it feels like to be the backup plan, he said. I stopped writing. What do you mean? My biological father, Stanley said, leaning back against my sofa. He didn't just leave. He started a new family 2 towns over. When I was 12, I ran into him at a hardware store. He was with his new son. He looked right through me. Didn't even blink. It wasn't that he didn't recognize me. It was that acknowledging me would have been inconvenient for the life he had built. He took a sip of cold coffee. I spent years trying to be impressive enough to make him regret it. Stanley continued. I got straight A's. I made varsity. I thought if I was perfect, he would come back. It took me a long time to realize that his absence had nothing to do with my value. It was just about his weakness. He looked at me. You are doing the same thing. Isla, you are trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect victim, the perfect professional, hoping that if you are good enough, they will stop using you. But they won't. You can't perform your way into being loved by people who only see you as a resource. I am scared, I admitted. The words came out as a whisper. If I file this police report, if I turn her in, I am an orphan. I am 34, and I will be completely alone. You won't be alone, Stanley said. He didn't reach out to touch me. He didn't make a move. He just held the space. I am right here. Diane is right here. Frank is right here. We aren't going anywhere. I don't need you to be perfect, or rich, or happy all the time to stay. I just need you to be honest. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. It wasn't about flowers or diamonds. It was about stability. It was a promise that I could fall apart, and he wouldn't leave the room. 2 days later, I was at Diane's office, the final police report sitting on the mahogany desk. It was a thick document. It laid out the timeline, the IP addresses, the audio recording. If I signed it and submitted it, Marla would face felony charges. I held the pen. My hand was shaking. You don't have to do it today, Diane said softly. But the longer you wait, the more time they have to open another account. I know, I said. It just feels like patricide. It feels like I am killing my family. You are not killing them, Diane said. You are stopping them from killing you. My phone rang. The screen lit up. Mom. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Diane. She nodded. I put the phone on speaker. Hello, I said. Isla? Marla's voice wasn't flat this time. It was shrill. It was the voice of a woman who had tried to swipe a card and been declined. What did you do to your credit? I am at the venue, I mean. I am trying to help Delaney with something and the bank is saying there is a freeze on your file. Unfreeze it, right now. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why I hadn't come for Thanksgiving. She just barked a command. I froze it because there was fraud. Mom, I said, my voice trembling. Someone opened a loan in my name. Don't be ridiculous, Marla snapped. It is probably a glitch. You are always so dramatic. Just call the bureau and lift the freeze. Delaney I need to sort this out today. Do not embarrass me. Isla, do not make this a thing. Embarrass you? I repeated. Mom, someone stole $5,000. That is a crime. It is family business, she yelled. God, you are so selfish. Everything has to be a federal case with you. Just fix it if you don't unfreeze it in 10 minutes. Don't bother coming for Christmas. I mean it. She hung up. The silence that followed was ringing. I looked at Stanley. He was standing by the window. His jaw was clenched so hard, a muscle was jumping in his cheek. He turned around, and for the first time, I saw genuine, white-hot anger in his eyes. She isn't worried about you, Stanley said, his voice low and dangerous. She isn't worried that her daughter is a victim of fraud. She is worried that the credit card machine didn't work. She doesn't fear your pain. Isla, she only fears her own exposure. He walked over to the desk. He looked at the police report. She just threatened you with Christmas, he said. She is holding her love hostage for $5,000. That is the exchange rate. Is that what you want to buy? I looked at the phone. I remembered the audio recording. She never checks. Delaney needs it more. I picked up the pen. No, I said. I am not buying it anymore. I signed the line. Isla Marie Watson. Diane took the document. She didn't smile. She just nodded, a solemn acknowledgement of a death and a birth happening in the same moment. I will file this immediately. The reaction was nuclear. Within 48 hours of the police contacting Marla for questioning, my phone became a war zone. First, it was the flying monkeys the term Diane used for the relatives a narcissist recruits to do their dirty work. My Aunt Linda texted, "I heard what you did. How could you? Your mother is sick with worry. Over a little money, you are tearing this family apart." My cousin Sarah sent a Facebook message. "Delaney is crying nonstop. You ruined her wedding planning. I thought you were the smart one, but you are just cruel." Then, the silence from my immediate family. No calls from Dennis. No texts from Delaney. They had circled the wagons. I was the enemy. I was the traitor who had gone to the cops. I didn't reply to any of them. I blocked the numbers one by one. Each block felt like cutting a heavy sandbag off a hot air balloon. I was rising, but the air up here was thin and cold. Stanley became my anchor. We started dating, though we didn't call it that yet. We just started doing life together. He came over on Tuesday nights to cook. He didn't make fancy meals. He made tacos or chili, things that were warm and filling. We stood in my small kitchen, chopping onions, bumping hips. "How was therapy?" he asked one night, handing me a bowl of salsa. "Hard," I said. "My therapist says I have to mourn the parents I wanted so I can accept the parents I have." "Sounds expensive," Stanley said dryly, "but necessary." "How was your day?" I asked. "Fine. Frank beat me at chess. Again. He claims he is losing his eyesight, but I think he is hustling me." We laughed. It was a small, quiet laugh, but it filled the room. I looked at him, his rolled-up sleeves, his calm hands, and realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I was just standing on the ground. We didn't post about us on social media. I didn't want Delaney to see. I didn't want Marla to have ammunition. This was mine. It was private. It was safe. But the past has a way of clawing at the door just when you think you have bolted it. 2 weeks after I filed the report, late on a Friday night, an email pinged on my phone. It wasn't from Marla. It wasn't from Delaney. It was from an address I didn't recognize. Generic user 5582 at gmail.com. I almost deleted it as spam, but the subject line stopped me. Subject, I am sorry. I opened it. Isla, I know you blocked my number. I know you blocked Mom. I don't blame you. I am writing from this account so your mother doesn't see. She checks my phone now. I just wanted to say I am sorry. I knew about the loan. I was in the room when she made the call. I told her it was a bad idea. But you know how she gets when she wants something for Delaney. She wears you down until you just say yes to make it stop. I am a weak man. Isla, I know that. I let her run over you for your whole life because it kept the peace for me. I am ashamed of that. But you need to know something else. The $5,000 is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a trust account. Grandma opened it for you when you were born. It was supposed to be for your education or your first house. Mom has been managing it since you turned 18. She told me the market crashed and it was gone. I found the statements in her desk yesterday. It wasn't the market. She transferred it. She moved it to an account under Delaney's name 5 years ago. That is how Delaney bought her house. I can't testify against her. I have to live here. But check the records for Watson Educational Trust. I love you, even if I haven't shown it. Dad, I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the kitchen floor. Stanley turned from the stove, the wooden spoon in his hand. Isla, what is it? I stared at the device. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I thought they had just stolen my credit. I thought they had just stolen my present. But they had stolen my past, too. The money my grandmother left me, the safety net that could have saved me from years of struggling in a studio apartment, of eating ramen, of worrying about rent, had been given to Delaney to buy a 3-bedroom house. Delaney wasn't just the favorite. She was living a life financed by my inheritance. "My father," I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage that was entirely new, entirely pure. "He just told me where the bodies are buried." Stanley walked over and picked up the phone. He read the email. His face went hard. "Okay," he said. "We aren't just filing a police report anymore." He looked at me. "Now," he said, "we are going to war." The snow was falling again in Minneapolis. But this time, I was not watching it from a cold apartment window. I was watching it from the passenger seat of Stanley's car as we pulled up to Riverside and Ash. It had been exactly 52 weeks since the night I walked into this restaurant alone, crying into a plate of turkey I couldn't swallow. It was the anniversary of the worst night of my life, which had inexplicably become the beginning of the best one. "You ready?" Stanley asked. He put the car in park. The engine ticked as it cooled. "I am surprisingly hungry," I said, "which is an improvement over last year." We walked in. The hostess stand was manned by the same woman with the tired eyes. Though she didn't recognize me, why would she? I was a different person. The woman who had walked in here last year was a ghost, haunted by the people who didn't want her. The woman walking in tonight was holding Stanley Holt's hand. Stanley had requested the same booth, the large, round one where the Carlyles had made room for me, but tonight, it was just the two of us. The dinner was quiet, intimate. We talked about work. We talked about the leak in his roof. It was the comfortable, unpretentious dialogue of two people who have learned the rhythm of each other's days. Then, after the plates were cleared, Stanley didn't get down on one knee. He didn't signal the waiter to bring out a sparkler. He simply reached across the table, just like he had done that first night to hand me a napkin. This time, he placed a small velvet box on the white tablecloth. "I brought you here because I wanted to rewrite the memory," Stanley said. His voice was steady, the same calm baritone that had grounded me through months of police reports and identity theft investigations. "Last year, you sat 4 feet away from me and thought you didn't have a place in the world." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, a vintage solitaire. Gold, simple, and timeless. It looked like something that had a history, something that would last. "I am not asking you to just marry me, Isla," he said. He looked me in the eye, and I saw the absolute certainty in his gaze. "I am asking to be your witness. I am asking to be the person who sets a place for you every single day. I will choose you when you are happy. I will choose you when you are scared, and I will choose you when you think you are too broken to be held." My throat tightened, but this time, it wasn't from grief. "You want the drama," I whispered, a callback to the label that had haunted me for decades. "I want the truth," Stanley said, "and you are the most honest thing I have ever found." "Yes," I said. The word came out on a breath. "Yes, I choose you too." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. At the table next to us, an older couple had been watching. The woman clapped her hands together, a soft, delightful sound. "Oh, look at that," she said to her husband. She said yes. A ripple of applause went through the small section of the restaurant. It wasn't a roar. It was a gentle wave of support from strangers. Last year, strangers had witnessed my humiliation. This year, they witnessed my redemption. We lived in the bubble of the engagement for exactly 3 days. Then, the reality of the wedding planning and the family politics popped it. We were sitting in Diane's living room, looking at invitation samples on a laptop. The template on the screen was elegant. Cream paper with black serif font. Mr. and Mrs. Dennis Watson and Mr. and Mrs. Frank Carlyle invite you to the wedding of their children. I stared at the names, Dennis and Marla Watson. Seeing their names at the top of the invitation felt like a lie. It felt like I was giving them billing on a production they had actively tried to sabotage. They were currently under investigation for felony fraud against me. They hadn't called to congratulate me. To print their names as the hosts of my joy felt like a betrayal of the woman I had fought so hard to become. "I can't do it," I said. pulling my hand away from the trackpad. I can't put their names on the paper. It looks like they won, like they own me. Then don't, Diane said. She was sitting in her armchair, knitting a scarf that was already 6 feet long. Change the format, together with their families, or just Isla and Stanley invite you. It is not just the invitation, I said. I stood up and paced the room. It is the whole ceremony, the giving away. Who gives me away? My father, who stole my inheritance. My mother, who opened a loan in my name. If I walk down that aisle alone, everyone will whisper. They will look at the empty front row and feel pity. I don't want pity at my wedding. I stopped at the fireplace, looking at the photos on the mantel. There was Stanley at graduation. There was Frank and Diane on a boat. There was a photo of me, taken last Christmas, laughing with a paper crown on my head. I don't want to be a Watson anymore, I said softly. I hate the name. It feels like a brand, like cattle. The room went quiet. The only sound was the clicking of Diane's knitting needles. Then, the clicking stopped. You know, Diane said, her voice shifting into her lawyer mode, precise and factual. You don't have to be a Watson, and I don't mean just changing your name when you get married. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? I mean adult adoption, Diane said. I blinked. Adoption. But I am 35 years old. The law in Minnesota does not have an age limit for being a child, Diane said. Adult adoption is a legal process. It is used to formalize a parent-child relationship that exists in fact, but not in law. It creates rights of inheritance. It grants next-of-kin status for hospital visitations. It severs the legal tie to the biological parents and creates a new birth certificate. She looked at Frank. Frank looked at me. We talked about this, Frank said gently. We didn't want to push you. We didn't know if it would feel like we were trying to erase your history. But, Diane continued, standing up and walking over to me, if you are asking who walks you down the aisle, if you are asking who your parents are, we are applying for the job. If you will have us. I felt the tears prickling, hot and fast. Is that even allowed? Doesn't it seem pathetic? A grown woman needing to be adopted. Isla, Frank said. He stood up, his knees popping, and walked over to stand beside Diane. He looked me in the eye, his face stern and loving. Listen to me closely. You are not replacing anyone. You are not playing pretend. You are simply stopping the act of waiting for people who are never coming. Stopping the act of waiting. That was it. That was the sentence that broke the dam. For 35 years, I had left the door unlocked, waiting for Dennis and Marla to walk in and be the parents I needed. Adoption wasn't about finding new parents. It was about locking that door so I could finally sleep safely in this new house. I want to, I whispered. I want to be a Carlisle. The process was shockingly bureaucratic for something so emotional. It involved background checks, petitions, and financial disclosures. It was during the financial disclosure phase that the final nail was hammered into the coffin of my past. We needed to separate my assets completely from the Watsons to ensure the adoption and the name change were clean, especially with the fraud investigation ongoing. Diane had pulled the deep archives of my financial history, subpoenaing records that dated back to my childhood, to check for any other liens Marla might have hidden. I was sitting at the dining table with a stack of bank records from 1998. Here it is, Diane said, sliding a piece of paper toward me. Her face was grim. Your father's email was right, but seeing it is different. I looked at the document. It was a withdrawal slip from the First National Bank of Grand Rapids. Account name Isla M. Watson Education Trust. Amount withdrawn. $42,000. Date June 12, 2009. Authorized signature Marla Watson. Custodian. I stared at the date. June 12, 2009. That was the week I graduated high school, I said, my voice hollow. I asked them for money for college. They told me there was nothing. They told me the market had wiped it out. I took out student loans. I am still paying them. Stanley reached over and tapped a second document. It was a public property record he had pulled. Property address 44 Oak Lane. Owner Delaney Watson. Purchase date June 30th, 2009. Down payment $40,000. The math was brutal. It was exact. They hadn't just favored her. They had liquidated my future to buy her a starter home. Every month I had spent eating ramen in college. Every overtime shift I worked to pay my tuition interest was paying for the roof over Delaney's head. I looked at the signature on the withdrawal slip. Marla's handwriting, looping, confident, without a tremor of guilt. "They ate me," I said. "They really just ate me alive." "And now," Frank said, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder, "we starve them." The court date was set for a Tuesday morning in April. It was a small courtroom. There was no jury, just a judge sitting behind a high wooden bench. The air smelled of floor wax and old books. I sat at the plaintiff's table. To my left were Diane and Frank. To my right was Stanley, holding my hand so tight his knuckles were white. He was my anchor, the physical weight keeping me from floating away into the stratosphere of panic. The judge was a woman with kind eyes and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked through the file. "This is a petition for adult adoption," she said. "Petitioner Isla Marie Watson, seeking to be adopted by Frank and Diane Carlisle." She looked down at me. "Ms. Watson," the judge said, "you understand that by granting this decree, your legal relationship with your biological parents, Dennis and Marla Watson, will be permanently severed. You will lose all rights of inheritance from them, and they will lose all rights to you. This is irrevocable." I thought about the empty chair at Thanksgiving. I thought about the voice on the recording stealing my credit. I thought about the $42,000 that bought Delaney's house. "I understand, Your Honor," I said. My voice did not shake. "And do you consent to this adoption freely, without coercion?" "I do." The judge turned to Frank and Diane. "And do you, Frank and Diane Carlisle, wish to adopt Isla as your lawful child, to treat her in all respects as if she had been born to you?" Frank cleared his throat. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "We do, Your Honor. We absolutely do." "Very well," the judge said. She picked up her pen. "I find that this adoption is in the best interest of all parties. The petition is granted. The decree is signed." She looked up and smiled. "Is there a name change request attached to this file?" "Yes, Your Honor," Diane said, standing up. "She will be dropping Watson." "Isla Carlisle," the judge said, testing the sound of it. "It has a nice ring to it." She banged the gavel. It was a sharp, wooden crack, the sound of a chain breaking. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 35 years. I looked at the piece of paper the clerk handed me. Decree of adoption. I looked at the names on the line for parents Diane Carlisle, Frank Carlisle. I turned to them. Frank opened his arms, and I stepped into them. It wasn't the polite hug of a guest. It was the crushing, rib-breaking hug of a father claiming his daughter. Diane wrapped her arms around both of us, burying her face in my shoulder. "Welcome home, kid," Frank whispered into my hair. I looked over Frank's shoulder at Stanley. He was smiling, a real, wide smile that reached his eyes. He had kept his promise. He had chosen me. And because he had chosen me, I had found the courage to choose myself. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright spring sunshine. The air was sweet. "So," Stanley said, checking his watch, "Ms. Carlisle, you have a wedding to plan, and I believe we have an invitation to reprint." "Yes," I said. I looked at the new driver's license application in my hand. Parents of the bride. Diane and Frank Carlisle. I kept Watson nowhere, not as a middle name, not as a hyphen. I left it on the floor of the courtroom, a shed skin that no longer fit the creature I had become. "Let's go," I said. "I have a lot of calls to make to the security team." Because while the legal battle was over, I knew the social war was just beginning. Marla and Delaney would not take this silence lying down. They would come for the wedding. They would come for their reputation. But this time, I wasn't a lonely girl in a cold apartment. I was a Carlisle. And Carlisles did not break. The silence from Grand Rapids following the adoption decree was not peace. It was the deep, pressurized silence of the ocean before a tsunami hits the shore. I knew it was coming. My biological family did not operate on the principles of reflection or apology. They operated on the principles of public relations warfare. The first wave hit on a Tuesday morning, not with a phone call, but with a notification. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop of my kitchen island. It was a screenshot sent by a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The caption read, "Did you see this? She is talking about you." I opened the image. It was a Facebook post from Delaney. It was long, rambling, and perfectly curated to garner maximum sympathy without technically crossing the line of libel. It is heartbreaking when the people you raised up, the people you protected, decide that money and status are more important than blood. Delaney wrote, "Some people will rewrite history just to fit in with a new, wealthier crowd. They will abandon their own aging parents, who sacrificed everything, just to play house with strangers who have deeper pockets. It hurts to be erased by a sister who thinks she is too good for where she came from. But we will keep praying for her. Real love can't be bought, even if a new last name can." I stared at the screen. The brilliance of the attack was in its vagueness. She didn't name me. She didn't name the Carlisles. But to everyone in our small hometown, to every aunt and neighbor and high school friend, she had painted a vivid picture Isla the gold digger, abandoning her poor, suffering parents for a rich new family. She had flipped the script. I wasn't the victim of fraud. I was the perpetrator of elitism. "She is good," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and admiration for the sheer audacity. "She is really, really good." Stanley, who was buttering toast next to me, looked at the screen. "It is fiction, Isla. It is a desperate narrative from someone losing control." "It doesn't matter if it is fiction," I said. "People believe fiction if it is entertaining, and Delaney is very entertaining." 2 days later, the war moved from the digital front to my doorstep. I was working from home, organizing a press release for a client. Stanley was at work. Diane had come over to help me review the seating chart for the wedding, which was now only 3 months away. We were drinking tea in the living room when the buzzer rang. I checked the monitor. My blood ran cold. Standing in the vestibule of my building, wrapped in a coat that looked significantly more expensive than anything I owned, was Marla. "It is my mother," I whispered. "My biological mother." Diane set her teacup down. She didn't look alarmed. She looked ready. "Buzz her in." "What? No. I have a restraining order pending." "Buzz her in," Diane repeated calmly. "If she is here, she is desperate. Let's hear the demand so we can document it. I am a witness. It is better than her screaming in the lobby." I pressed the button. My hand felt like lead. 3 minutes later, Marla Watson breezed into my apartment as if she still owned the lease on my life. She didn't look at the decor. She didn't look at Diane. Her eyes locked on me like a laser. "You need to stop this," she said. No hello, no preamble. "You need to call the district attorney today and tell them it was a misunderstanding. You gave me permission to open that loan. You forgot. That is the story." "I didn't give you permission," I said, standing behind the sofa, using it as a barricade. "You stole my identity, Marla, and you stole my trust fund." "The trust fund?" Marla laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "That money was for the family. Who do you think paid for your braces? Who paid for your piano lessons? You think you are entitled to keep score. I gave you life, Isla. Everything you have is mine." She took a step forward, her face twisting into that familiar mask of martyrdom. "And now this." She gestured vaguely at the room. "This adoption nonsense. Changing your name. You are humiliating us. The whole town is talking. You are making me look like a bad mother." "You are a bad mother," I said, It was the first time I had ever said the words aloud to her face. It felt terrifying and electric. Marla's face crumbled. She switched tactics instantly, moving from aggression to tears. "How can you say that I sacrificed my career for you? I stayed with your father for you. I have loved you even when you were difficult, even when you were so cold. And now you want to arrest me. For a few $1,000s, I need you to drop the case. Isla. And I need invitations for the wedding. If the Watsons aren't there, people will ask questions. We need to present a united front." "No," I said. "Isla, please," she wailed, reaching for my hand. "Don't be cruel. Mrs. Watson." Diane's voice cut through the room like a gavel. She hadn't moved from the armchair, but her presence suddenly filled the entire space. Marla froze. She looked at Diane, realizing for the first time that we were not alone. "Who are you?" Marla snapped, wiping a tear that instantly vanished. "I am Diane Carlyle," Diane said pleasantly. "I am Isla's mother, legally and emotionally, and I am also the person who filed the fraud report you are asking my daughter to falsify." Marla stiffened. "This is a private family matter." "Actually," Diane stood up, smoothing her skirt, "it is a criminal matter, and attempting to intimidate a witness, which is what you are doing right now, is a separate felony. I suggest you leave before I call the police to add a count of harassment to your file." Marla stared at Diane. She looked at the expensive knitting in Diane's hands, the calm authority in her posture. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was outgunned. She wasn't dealing with her daughter, the scapegoat. She was dealing with a matriarch who protected her own. "You brainwashed her," Marla spat at Diane. "She was fine until she met you people." "She was surviving," Diane corrected. "Now she is living. Please leave my daughter's home." Marla looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only the cold calculation of a predator assessing a lost asset. She turned and slammed the door so hard a picture frame on the wall tilted. I sank onto the sofa, my knees giving out. Diane walked over and sat next to me. She didn't hug me immediately. She just put her hand on my knee, grounding me. "That," Diane said softly, "is a woman who knows she has lost." The fallout was immediate. "He is my father," I said, feeling that old pull of guilt. "He sounds terrified." "He is a coward," Stanley said, "and cowards are dangerous because they will watch you die rather than make a scene." Stanley took the phone from my hand. He placed it on the table. "New rule," he said. "No more direct contact. Not with Marla, not with Dennis, not with Delaney. If they want to speak to you, they speak to our lawyer. If they email you, you forward it to legal. You are not their emotional dumpster anymore." "Is that okay?" I asked. "Is it okay to just stop listening?" "It is necessary," Stanley said. "You don't negotiate with terrorists, Isla, and emotional terrorists are the worst kind." The next day, Diane's lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter to Marla, Dennis, and Delaney. It outlined the defamation in the Facebook posts, the harassment at my apartment, and the attempted witness tampering. It stated clearly that any further contact would result in an immediate restraining order. The Watsons responded the only way they knew how. They played the victim harder. Delaney didn't post again, but the stories started circulating. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother's cousin, Aunt Barb. "I just wanted to hear your voice," Barb said, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Marla told me about the trouble, about how you are confused. I am not confused. Aunt Barb," I said, adhering to Stanley's rule but unable to hang up immediately. "I am handling a legal matter. Well, you know," Barb lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Marla always said you were the clever one. I remember at Christmas a few years ago. She was bragging about how she opened a few credit cards in your name to help with the renovation. She called it the Isla Fund. She laughed about it. She said, 'Isla doesn't need credit. She has no husband to impress.'" I froze. "She bragged about it." "Oh, yes," Barb said. "She thought it was smart, a loophole, But now she is saying you are twisting it around. I just don't know who to believe, dear. But you really shouldn't sue your mother. It looks bad. I hung up. She had laughed about it. The ELA fund. My financial identity wasn't just stolen. It was a punchline at a Christmas party I hadn't been invited to. That was the moment the last shred of guilt evaporated. I wasn't protecting a family. I was protecting a crime syndicate. We need security, I told Stanley that night. We were lying in bed. The wedding was a month away. For the ceremony, Stanley asked. Yes, they aren't going to stay away. Marla feels entitled to be there. Delaney will want a scene. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder while I say my vows. I don't want to be scanning the crowd for my mother's face. Done, Stanley said. I will hire off-duty officers. Professional, discreet. If a Watson steps within 500 feet of the venue, they will be escorted out before you even know they are there. I don't think they will try to hurt me physically, I said. That isn't their style. No, Stanley agreed. They don't want to break your bones. They want to break your moment. They want to make the wedding about them, about their drama, about how cruel you were to exclude them. We won't let them. I hired a private security firm the next day. I gave them photos of Marla, Dennis, and Delaney. I gave them the instruction, do not engage, do not argue, just remove. The silence returned for 3 weeks. It was the final stretch. I began to relax. I began to believe that the cease and desist had actually worked, that the shame of the looming fraud indictment had silenced them. But a narcissist never leaves the stage without an encore. 3 days before the wedding, we were in Asheville, checking into the hotel. The air was crisp and smelled of pine. I felt light. I was Isla Carlisle. I was about to marry the love of my life. Stanley's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He frowned. Who is it? I asked, unpacking my dress. It is a text, Stanley said, from a number I don't have saved. He hesitated. He looked at me, debating whether to show me. Read it, I said. We have no secrets. He turned the screen toward me. It was from Delaney. You seem like a nice guy. Stanley, I actually feel bad for you. You think you are saving a victim, but you are just marrying a liar. Ask her about the baby. Ask her who she really is before you sign that license. Once a fraud, always a fraud. Don't say I didn't warn you. I stared at the words. Ask her about the baby. My blood ran cold. The room seemed to tilt. There was no baby. I had never had a baby. I had never been pregnant. What is she talking about? Stanley asked. He didn't sound suspicious. He sounded angry on my behalf. What baby? There isn't one, I said, my voice rising in panic. Stanley, I swear, there never was. She is making it up. She is throwing a grenade just to see if it explodes. I know, Stanley said. He deleted the text without replying. I know she is lying, Isla. I know who you are. But why that? I paced the room. Why that specific lie? Then I remembered, years ago, when I was 20, I had a scare, a false alarm. I had told Marla. I had cried on her shoulder, terrified. It turned out to be nothing stress, a delayed cycle, but I had been vulnerable. I had given her that fear. And now, 15 years later, Delaney, fed by Marla, was twisting that moment of vulnerability into a weapon to destroy my marriage. They were taking a non-event and turning it into a secret scandal. They are trying to plant doubt, I said. They want you to look at me at the altar and wonder if I am hiding a child. They want to corrupt the way you see me. Stanley grabbed my shoulders. He held me still. They failed, he said firmly. I don't wonder. I don't doubt. And on Saturday, when we stand up there, they are going to be 500 miles away, watching from the outside, while we build a fortress they can never touch again. I nodded, leaning into him, but as I closed my eyes, I knew the battle wasn't quite over. They had fired their last shot, but they hadn't seen mine yet, because in my suitcase, tucked inside the pocket of my robe, was the USB drive containing the full audio of the fraud call, and if they dared to show up, if they dared to try and speak, I wasn't going to shout. I was just going to press play. Asheville, North Carolina. In late October is not just a location, it is a mood. The Blue Ridge Mountains were on fire with color burnt orange, deep crimson, and a yellow so bright it hurt to look at directly. We had chosen a venue halfway up a mountain, a restored estate made of stone and timber that felt sturdy, ancient, and miles away from the flat, gray suburbs of Grand Rapids. We arrived 5 days before the ceremony to finalize the details. The air here was thin and crisp, smelling of wood smoke and dried leaves. Every time I inhaled, I felt like I was scrubbing the inside of my lungs clean. We sat in the bridal suite, a room with a vaulted ceiling and a view of the valley. Assembling the welcome bags for the guests, Diane was stuffing tissue paper into gift sacks with the efficiency of a machine. Frank was testing the local honey jars to ensure the seals were tight. I picked up one of the programs we had just picked up from the printer. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored, with elegant black lettering, the wedding of Isla Carlisle and Stanley Holt, and below that, in smaller script, parents of the bride, Diane and Frank Carlisle. I ran my thumb over the raised ink. It wasn't just paper, it was a Declaration of Independence. It was a legal document masquerading as stationery. For 35 years, I had dreaded the idea of a wedding program, terrified of the blank space where a loving family should be listed. Now, the space was full. "Is the font too small?" Diane asked, pausing with a handful of gold tissue paper. I told the printer that Frank's eyes aren't what they used to be. "It is perfect," I said. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "Good," Diane said. "Now, about the cake cutting, the coordinator asked if you want to do the smash thing. I told her absolutely not because it is barbaric to ruin a $1,000 dress. But Frank thinks it is funny." "I asked what Isla wants," Frank corrected gently. He looked at me. "Kid, do you want a smash cake in Stanley's face? It is your call. No tradition is mandatory here." "It is your call." That was the refrain of the Carlisle Planning Committee, for months. They had asked me what I wanted, not what would look good on Instagram, not what would please the relatives, what I wanted. It was a question I was still learning how to answer without flinching. "No smashing," I said. "I want to eat the cake, not wear it." "Civilized," Diane noted approvingly. "I raised you well, even if I only raised you for 6 months. The peace of the mountains was seductive, but I knew it was fragile. We were building a fortress of joy, but the enemy was still circling the perimeter." Later that afternoon, Stanley and I met with the venue coordinator and the head of the security team I had hired. We sat in a small office behind the kitchen. The security lead was a man named Garrett, an ex-military guy who spoke in short, clipped sentences. "We have the photos of the 3 subjects," Garrett said, tapping a folder containing clear headshots of Marla, Dennis, and Delaney. "We have the perimeter secured. There is only one road up to the estate. We will have a checkpoint at the bottom, if they aren't on the list. They don't get up the mountain." "They might try to blend in," I said. "My mother is convincing. She can cry on command. She might tell you she is the mother of the bride, and there has been a terrible mistake." "The list is the law," Garrett said. "But we need a protocol for engagement if they manage to get to the reception area. Do you want a hard exit? Meaning, we physically remove them immediately, or a soft containment?" I looked at Stanley. We had discussed this. "Soft containment," Stanley said. "If they cause a scene, remove them. But if they just show up and sit in the back, we don't want a wrestling match in the middle of the vows. Just flank them. Make sure they don't get near the aisle." "And the microphone," I added. My voice was steady, though my hands were cold. "Under no circumstances is anyone allowed to touch a microphone unless they are the DJ or the officiant. Cut the sound if you have to." Garrett nodded and made a note. "No open mic. Copy that." We walked out of the meeting feeling like we had just planned a heist rather than a wedding, but the precaution was necessary, because just that morning, the trap had arrived. It came in the form of an email from Delaney. Subject: olive branch. I sat on the balcony of our room, reading it aloud to Stanley. Isla, I know things have been tense. I know we have said things we regret, but I can't imagine my big sister getting married without me there. Mom is a mess. Dad is a ghost. We are falling apart without you. We want to come, just to see you. We won't cause trouble, I promise. Actually, I was hoping maybe I could say a few words, just a short toast, to clear the air, to let everyone know that we are still a family. Despite the drama, it would mean the world to Mom to see us standing together on that stage. Let me fix this, Isla. Let me be your sister again. I lowered the phone. It is a trap, I said. Obviously, Stanley said. He was leaning against the railing, watching the sunset over the valley. She wants the microphone. She wants to stand up in front of 200 people and give a toast that is actually a passive-aggressive assassination of your character. She wants to tell a funny story about how hard you were to live with, or how you always overreacted, so she can reclaim the narrative. She wants the visual, I realized. She wants the photo of us hugging on stage so she can post it and say, "See, she is fine. We are fine. The lawsuit is just her being crazy." So, what is the answer? Stanley asked. I looked at the mountains. I thought about the security checkpoint. The answer is no to the speech, I said. But I'm going to let them come. Stanley turned to look at me. Isla, are you sure? If I ban them completely, they become martyrs, I explained. They will stand at the bottom of the mountain and weep to the security guards, and then go home and tell everyone I had them thrown out like trash. They feed on exclusion. And if they come, and they are forced to sit in the back row, and they are not allowed to speak, and they have to watch Frank and Diane walk me down the aisle that is not martyrdom, I said, that is defeat. I want them to see it. I want them to see that I built a life that has no room for their chaos. Okay, Stanley said. He walked over and kissed my forehead. Then they come as guests, spectators only. I replied to Delaney's email with 2 sentences. You may attend as guests. There will be no speeches, no toasts, and no family photos. I didn't sign it Love Isla. I signed it with my initials. The response from the universe came 48 hours later. Not from Delaney, but from Dennis. He called me while I was alone in the room, steaming my veil. I stared at the screen. Dad. I had given myself a rule, no direct contact, but something about the persistence of the ringing made me pick up. I needed to hear it. I needed to know if there was anything left of the father I once adored. Isla. His voice was thin, reedy, like a radio signal fading out. I am here, Dennis, I said. I couldn't call him Dad, not anymore. I got the email, he stammered. About the conditions. We will be there. We will be quiet. Good, I said. Isla, I need to tell you, he whispered. I could hear the sound of a door closing in the background. The click of a lock. He was hiding. About the trust fund. The withdrawal. I stopped moving. The steamer hissed in the silence. I know she took it, I said. You told me in the email. I didn't just know, he said, and his voice broke into a sob. I signed it too. Isla, it required 2 signatures. She put the paper in front of me. She said Delaney had a chance to buy this house, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime deal. I said it was your money. I said it was wrong. But you signed it, I said. She told me. He took a ragged breath. She told me if I didn't sign it, she would leave. She would take the girls, take the house, take everything. She said I was a weak man who couldn't provide for his favorite daughter. She meant Delaney. She always meant Delaney. So you bought your peace with my future, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I was afraid of losing the family, he wept. I am so sorry. Isla, I was so afraid of being alone. You were afraid of the wrong thing, I said softly. You kept the family, Dennis, but you lost the daughter who would have taken care of you. I hung up. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, heavy pity. He was a man in a cage of his own making, and I had just walked out with the key. The morning of the wedding. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air was cool, but the sun was warm. I was in the dressing room, putting on my earrings, simple pearl drops that Diane had lent me. They were her grandmother's. Something borrowed. There was a knock on the door. It was the hotel concierge. "Package for Ms. Carlyle," he said. It came via overnight courier, marked urgent. He handed me a thick, padded envelope. The return address was First National Bank, Legal Department. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had subpoenaed the full unredacted recordings weeks ago, thinking they would never arrive in time. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a stack of certified transcripts and a small black USB drive. I pulled out the paper. My eyes scanned the text. It was the transcript of the call regarding the trust fund withdrawal from 2009. I had the withdrawal slip, but I had never heard the call. I read the lines. "Bank officer, ma'am. This account is designated for Isla Watson's education. Are you sure you want to liquidate the entire balance? There are penalties. Marla Watson. I am the custodian. I am sure. Bank officer and Mr. Watson agrees. Dennis Watson, silence. Yes, I agree. Marla Watson. Look, just cut the check. Isla isn't going to a big college anyway. She isn't the academic type. She will be fine at community college. Delaney has potential. Delaney deserves a start. She deserves it more." I stared at the words on the page. She isn't the academic type. I had graduated valedictorian of my high school class. I had a full ride to the state university that I lost because I couldn't pay the room and board this money would have covered. Delaney deserves it more. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just theft. It was a value judgment. They had weighed my potential against Delaney's comfort, and they had sold me for parts. I looked at the USB drive. This was it. This was the nuclear option. If Marla stood up, if Delaney grabbed a mic, if they tried to whisper to my guests that I was crazy, that I was cruel, that I was a liar, I had the voice of God in my pocket. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, sharp power. I walked over to my bridal clutch, a small, beaded bag sitting on the vanity. I put my lipstick inside. I put a tissue inside. And then, I dropped the USB drive in. It clicked against the metal clasp. It was my something old, a record of the past. It was my something new, the evidence that would free me. It was my something borrowed, the money they took, and it was definitely my something blue. I snapped the bag shut. Diane walked in, wearing a navy blue gown that made her look like royalty. "You ready, kid?" she asked. "Frank is pacing in the hall. He is nervous he is going to step on your train." I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at the clutch. "I am ready," I said. "Let them come. I have everything I need." The face looking back at me from the antique floor-length mirror was familiar, yet entirely foreign. For 35 years, I had looked into mirrors and seen a woman who was apologizing for taking up space. I saw a woman who checked her reflection to make sure she wasn't too much, too loud, or too visible. But the woman standing in the bridal suite of the Biltmore estate did not look sorry. She looked formidable. The dress helped. It was not the poofy, princess confection Marla had tried to force me into when I was 25 and briefly engaged to a man I didn't love. This dress was sleek, architectural, and modern. It was made of heavy silk crepe that fell in a straight line like a column of water. It had long sleeves and a plunging back. It was a dress for a woman who stood on her own 2 feet. I touched the glass. "Hello, Isla," I whispered. "You are allowed to be here." Behind me, the door opened softly. It was Diane. She was wearing a navy blue gown that made her look like a benevolent queen. She held a long tulle veil in her hands. "Stop critiquing yourself," Diane said, seeing me examine my waistline. "You look like a masterpiece." "I feel like an imposter," I admitted, lowering my hand. "I keep waiting for someone to burst in and tell me that the venue is double booked or the groom realized he made a mistake." Diane walked over to me. She turned me around by the shoulders. Her grip was firm, The grip of a woman who had spent decades holding families together when they wanted to fall apart. "Listen to me," she said. "Imposter syndrome is just a ghost story we tell ourselves. You are not an imposter. You are a Carlyle, and we do not shrink." She lifted the veil. It floated in the air for a second, catching the morning light, before settling over my hair. She fastened the comb with practiced fingers. "There," she said, stepping back, her eyes suddenly shiny with tears she refused to let fall. "My beautiful daughter." The word hung in the air. Daughter. It wasn't the first time she had used it, but today, legally and spiritually, it carried a weight that anchored me to the floor. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you, Mom." The word didn't trip over my tongue. It didn't feel like a betrayal of Marla. It felt like a correction of the record. Diane squeezed my hand. "Okay, no crying. Mascara is expensive. Stanley is pacing a hole in the carpet downstairs. He gave me this for you." She handed me a folded piece of paper. It was heavy cardstock, the same cream paper we had used for the invitations. I opened it. It was Stanley's handwriting, sharp, angular, and efficient. "Isla, there are armed guards at the gate. There is a lawyer in the front row. There is a USB drive in your purse. But none of that is why we are safe. We are safe because I see you. I really see you. And today, nobody takes this day from us. Not the Watsons, not the past, not the fear. Meet me at the altar. I will be the guy looking at you like you are the only person in the world. Love, your husband." I folded the note and pressed it against my chest. The panic that had been fluttering in my stomach like a trapped bird suddenly went still. I wasn't a victim today. I was a bride. "Let's go," I said to Diane. "I am ready to get married." The ceremony took place on a stone terrace overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. The trees were blazing with the colors of autumn russet, gold, and deep burgundy. The air was cool, biting at my bare skin, but the adrenaline kept me warm. Frank met me at the heavy wooden doors that led to the terrace. He looked dashing in his tuxedo, though he kept tugging at the collar. "You look decent, kid," he joked, but his chin was trembling. "You look okay yourself, Frank," I said. "Ready to give me away?" He stopped. He looked at me with serious, wet eyes. "I am not giving you away, Isla. I am walking you forward. There is a difference." The music started. It wasn't the traditional wedding march. It was a string quartet version of a song Stanley and I loved, something haunting and sweet. The doors opened. The world expanded. I saw the rows of white chairs filled with people who were smiling, genuinely smiling. I saw my friends from work. I saw the Carlyle cousins. I saw the security guards standing discreetly at the perimeter, their hands clasped behind their backs, looking like statues in suits. And at the end of the aisle, I saw Stanley. He wasn't smiling. He was watching me with an intensity that made everything else blur. He looked solid. He looked like the foundation of a house that would never collapse. Frank walked me down the aisle. I felt the pressure of his arm, steady and sure. When we reached the front, he didn't just hand my hand to Stanley. He took Stanley's hand and placed it over mine, pressing them together. "Take care of each other," Frank whispered. It was a command, not a suggestion. The ceremony was short. We didn't want long readings or performances. We wanted the truth. "I, Stanley, take you, Isla, to be my wife," Stanley said, his voice carrying over the wind. "I promise to be your witness. I promise that you will never have to earn your place with me. It is yours. It has always been yours. I, Isla, take you, Stanley," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I promise to stop looking back at the people who left me and start looking at the person who stayed. I choose you. Every day, I choose you." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. The applause that erupted wasn't polite. It was raucous. It was the sound of a victory lap. Stanley kissed me, and for a moment, the mountains, the guests, and the guards disappeared. There was only the taste of him and the smell of the cold mountain air. We walked back up the aisle, hands gripped tight, laughing. I felt light. I felt invincible. I thought foolishly. We did it. We actually pulled it off. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom. It was a space of high timber beams and chandeliers made of antlers and crystal. The tables were set with dark linens and overflowing centerpieces of wildflowers. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Waiters circulated with champagne. A jazz band played in the corner. I stood near the head table, holding a glass of sparkling water, accepting hugs from Diane's extended family. "Welcome to the clan," a cousin named Mike said, clapping me on the back. "Hope you like loud arguments about football." "I'm looking forward to it," I laughed. I scanned the room. It was perfect. The lighting was warm and amber. The guests were happy. The security team was invisible. Then, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. It was Garrett, the head of security. He wasn't smiling. "Mrs. Holt," he said. The new name sounded strange, but his tone brought me back to reality instantly. "We have a situation at the main gate." My stomach dropped. "Who is it?" "3 individuals," Garrett said. "A man, a woman, and a younger woman. They claim to be the bride's parents and sister. They are not on the guest list." "Did they try to force entry?" "No," Garrett said. "They are standing at the checkpoint. The older woman is crying. She is making quite a scene for the other guests arriving late. She is telling anyone who will listen that there has been a clerical error and her daughter would never exclude her." I looked at Stanley, who had appeared at my side the moment Garrett approached. He touched the small of my back. "Do you want me to handle it?" Stanley asked quietly. "I can tell Garrett to turn them away. We can have the police escort them off the mountain." I closed my eyes for a second. I imagined it. Marla screaming at the bottom of the hill. Dennis wringing his hands. Delaney posting a video of their brutal eviction from her sister's wedding. They would be the victims. I would be the monster. If I sent them away, they controlled the narrative. If I let them in, I controlled the environment. "No," I said, opening my eyes. "Let them in." Garrett blinked. "Ma'am, you gave specific orders." "I am changing them," I said. "Bring them up, but execute the containment protocol. They sit at table 19. Table 19 is in the back corner," Stanley noted. "Behind the pillar." "Exactly," I said. "They can watch, but they cannot participate. And Garrett, tell your men that if they move toward the microphone, or the cake, or the head table, you remove them. Hard exit." "Understood," Garrett said. He touched his earpiece and walked away. 10 minutes later, the doors to the ballroom opened. I was standing in the center of the room, talking to Frank. I saw the shift in the atmosphere before I saw them. People turned. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. Marla walked in first. She was wearing a pale pink dress that was tasteful, but her face was a mask of tragic bravery. She clung to Dennis's arm. Dennis looked like he was walking to the gallows. He kept his head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, but it was Delaney who sucked the air out of the room. She was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. She was not wearing a guest dress. She was wearing a floor-length gold sequin gown with a slit that went up to her thigh and a neckline that plunged to her navel. It was a dress you wore to the Met Gala. It was a dress you wore when you wanted to be the only thing people looked at. She paused in the doorway, striking a pose, waiting for the paparazzi that didn't exist. Her eyes scanned the room, hungry and sharp. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking for an audience. "My God," Diane whispered, appearing at my elbow. "She looks like a disco ball." "She looks desperate," I said. I watched as the security guard politely but firmly guided them past the receiving line, past the dance floor, and toward the dark corner in the back. I saw Delaney argue. I saw her point her finger at the head table. I saw the guard shake his head, his face impassive. They were seated at table 19. It was the table for the vendors and the distant relatives who hadn't RSVP'd until yesterday. Marla looked around the table, realizing her placement. Her face went tight. Delaney sat down, fluffing her enormous skirt, taking up 2 chairs. I took a deep breath. They were here. The monsters were in the room. But the roof didn't collapse. The music didn't stop. "They look small," Stanley said, standing beside me. "From here, they look very small." "They are," I said. "Let's eat." Dinner was served. The tension in the room began to dissipate as the wine flowed and the food arrived. The Watsons stayed in their corner. I saw Marla trying to flag down a waiter to complain about something, probably the draft, but the waiter moved on. I saw Delaney taking endless selfies with the flash on, trying to manufacture a good time. We moved through the speeches. Frank gave a toast that made half the room cry, talking about how a family is built by love, not just biology. Diane gave a speech that was funny and sharp, welcoming Stanley to the circus. I relaxed. I actually relaxed. I took a bite of my cake. I danced with my husband. I forgot about the USB drive in my purse. The DJ faded the music out. The lights dimmed slightly. The master of ceremonies, a professional guy we had hired named David, walked to the center of the dance floor with the microphone. He was smiling, consulting his index cards. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice booming through the speakers, "we have had some beautiful words tonight from the parents of the bride and the groom." I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "But," David continued, "I have just been handed a note. It seems we have a surprise addition to the program. We have a special request for one final toast." My blood ran cold. I looked at Stanley. He was already standing up. "Garrett," Stanley barked into the air, looking for security. But David was already talking. He didn't know the war he was starting. He just saw a request on a napkin and thought he was being helpful. "Please welcome to the floor," David announced with a flourish, "the bride's sister, Delaney Watson." The room went deadly silent. From the back corner, a figure in gold rose. Delaney didn't just walk. She glided. She moved with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. She had bypassed security. She had bypassed the protocol. She had charmed or tricked the MC. She walked toward the center of the room, her hand outstretched for the microphone. I saw Marla sitting up straight in the back, a triumphant smirk on her face. This was the moment. The ambush. Stanley moved to intercept, but he was too far away. Garrett was pushing through the crowd, but Delaney was closer. She reached the MC. She took the microphone. Her grip on it was white-knuckled. She turned to face me. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were dead. "Hi, everyone," Delaney said. Her voice amplified, echoing off the timber beams. "I know I wasn't on the list, but I just couldn't let my big sister get married without sharing the truth about who she really is." She paused for dramatic effect. The silence was thick enough to choke on. "Because," Delaney purred, "there are some secrets that just don't belong in a marriage, and I think Stanley deserves to know what he is really buying into." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I didn't look at Stanley. I didn't look at Garrett. I looked at my clutch sitting on the table. The USB drive. Delaney had the microphone. But I had the bomb. "Don't do it, Delaney," I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence of the room, it carried, "Oh, Isla," Delaney laughed, a sound that grated like glass. "I am just getting started." The ballroom was suspended in a state of suffocating silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes a gunshot. Delaney stood in the center of the dance floor, the microphone clutched in her hand like a weapon, her gold sequins catching the light. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. A manic smile plastered on her face as she prepared to detonate the bomb she thought she held. But before she could speak another word, Garrett moved. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply stepped out from the shadows of the pillar. A large, dark suit moving with terrifying speed. In 2 strides. He was beside her. He didn't tackle her. He just placed a hand on the microphone, his grip iron, and leaned in close. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw Delaney's eyes widen. She flinched, her confidence fracturing for a split second. "David," The master of ceremonies, seeing his chance to salvage his career, lunged forward and snatched the microphone from Delaney's loosening grip. He was sweating profusely. "Thank you," David stammered into the mic, his voice cracking with forced cheerfulness. "Thank you for that enthusiasm. Let's get back to the program. Shall we? We are running a bit behind schedule." Delaney stood there, stranded in the spotlight without her amplifier. She looked back at table 19. Marla was gesturing frantically for her to sit down, to regroup. Delaney smoothed her dress, tossed her hair, and stepped back. But she didn't leave the floor. She hovered on the edge, waiting for her next opening. David wiped his forehead. He looked at his index cards, his hands shaking. He decided to go for the biggest, safest applause line in the book to reset the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," David boomed, trying to project authority. "Before we open the dance floor, let's take a moment to honor the people who made this beautiful day possible. Please join me in welcoming and thanking the parents of the bride." It happened in slow motion, at table 19, in the dark back corner. Marla Watson stood up. It was a reflex. It was muscle memory. For 34 years, she had been the mother. She had owned that title. She had wielded it like a cudgel. In her mind, the script had not changed. She smoothed the front of her pink dress. She lifted her chin. She put on her gracious, benevolent smile, ready to wave to the crowd, ready to accept the adoration she believed was her birthright. She stood there, waiting for the spotlight to swing her way. But the spotlight did not move toward table 19. The spotlight swung to the head table. "Please give it up," David read clearly from the card. "For Diane and Frank Carlisle." The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. My friends, the Carlisle family, the colleagues who knew my story. They all stood up. They cheered. Frank stood up, looking surprised but proud. Waving his hand, Diane stood next to him, beaming, and blew a kiss in my direction. And in the back of the room, Marla Watson was left standing alone in the shadows. She looked like a statue of confusion. Her smile faltered, then vanished. She looked around, realizing that no one was looking at her. No one was clapping for her. She was standing up for an ovation that was not hers. The humiliation was absolute. She slowly sank back into her chair, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. Delaney saw it. She saw her mother crumble, and that was the spark that blew the powder keg. Delaney lunged. She didn't go for the mic this time. She screamed. "This is sick!" Delaney shrieked, her voice tearing through the applause, sharp enough to cut glass. "You people are sick. She has been brainwashed. That woman is not her mother." She pointed a shaking finger at Diane. "You bought her," Delaney yelled, stepping into the center of the room again, ignoring Garrett. "You think because you have money you can just steal a daughter. You stole my sister. You turned her against her own flesh and blood." The music stopped completely. The applause died. The guests murmured, a low rumble of shock and confusion. Stanley stepped in front of me, his body a shield, but I put a hand on his arm. "No," I said softly. "Move." "Isla," he warned. "Move, Stanley. I am done hiding behind guards." He looked at me, saw the cold fire in my eyes, and stepped aside. I walked out onto the dance floor. I didn't have a microphone, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, I didn't need one. The silk of my dress rustled softly, the only sound in the world. I stopped 10 feet from Delaney. I looked past her, straight to table 19, straight at Marla. "Why are you here?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Marla stood up again. This time, she wasn't smiling. She was trembling with rage. She walked out of the shadows, pushing past Dennis, coming to stand beside Delaney, 2 against 1, the old dynamic. "We are here because we are your family," Marla spat. "We are here because I gave birth to you. I raised you, and I will not sit in the corner while you play fantasy house with these strangers. You are a Watson, Isla. You owe us respect." "Respect," I repeated. "You came here to claim a seat. You came here to claim ownership. You think because you share my DNA, you own the deed to my life. I am your mother, Marla screamed, her composure finally shattering. I made you, and you treat me like a criminal over a little money. Over a misunderstanding, you are ungrateful. You have always been ungrateful. You wreck everything with your drama. Drama, the magic word, the label she had used to dismiss my pain for 3 decades. I am drama. I nodded slowly. That is the story, isn't it? Isla is crazy. Isla makes things up. Isla is the villain. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the black USB drive. I walked over to the DJ booth. The DJ, a young guy named Leo, looked terrified. Plug this in, I said. Ma'am, I don't think. Plug it in, I ordered. And play track 1, volume up. Leo looked at Stanley. Stanley nodded. Leo plugged it in. Marla stepped forward. What is that? What are you doing? I am finishing the story, I said. I turned to the crowd. 200 faces watched me. My mother says I am dramatic, I said, my voice ringing out. She says I make things up. She says the fraud investigation is a misunderstanding. She says she loves me. I signaled Leo. The speakers crackled. And then, Marla's voice filled the room. It wasn't the screaming voice of the woman standing in front of me. It was the cool, dismissive voice of the woman on the phone with the bank in 2009. Bank officer. Are you sure you want to liquidate the entire balance? There are penalties. Recording, I am the custodian. I am sure. Marla froze. Her hands flew to her mouth. Delaney took a step back, looking at the speakers as if they were possessed. Bank officer and Mr. Watson agrees. Dennis. Recording, yes. I agree. Marla recording. Look, just cut the check. Isla isn't going to a big college anyway. She isn't the academic type. She will be fine at community college. Delaney has potential. Delaney deserves a start. She deserves it more. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountains outside. It was a physical weight. She deserves it more, I repeated, looking at Marla. That is what you said. $42,000. My education, my start. You didn't just steal it. You gave it to her. I pointed at Delaney. You bought her house with my future, I said, and you convinced yourself it was justice. Marla made a choking sound. She looked at the crowd. She looked for an ally, for someone to nod and say, yes, but you did your best. But there was no one. The guests were looking at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. The mask had not just slipped. It had been incinerated. It was for the family, Marla stammered, her voice thin and weak. Delaney needed. Stop, a male voice croaked. It wasn't Stanley. It wasn't Frank. It was Dennis. He was standing at table 19. He was crying, ugly, heaving sobs that shook his narrow shoulders. He walked toward us, his steps unsteady. Dennis, shut up, Marla hissed. No, Dennis said. He looked at me. His face was wet, red, and pathetic. I signed it. I signed the paper. Isla, I knew it was wrong. I knew you were smart. You were the smartest one of us. But I was scared of her. He pointed a shaking finger at Marla. I let her eat you alive because I didn't want her to eat me. Dennis sobbed. I am sorry. God, Isla, I am so sorry. The confession hung in the air. The first honest words spoken by a Watson in 30 years. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had been my father. I felt the urge to comfort him, the old reflex to fix his pain, to tell him it was okay, but I didn't move. I believe you, I said. My voice was gentle but final. I believe you are sorry. Dennis, I believe you regret it. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. But I am not your confessional, I said. And I am not your sacrifice anymore. I don't hate you. Hate takes too much energy. But I will not build the rest of my life on the foundation of your regret. Your apology changes nothing. The seat at my table is gone. I turned to Marla and Delaney. Delaney was pale, her sequined dress looking cheap under the harsh lights of truth. Marla looked shrunken, stripped of her delusions. "You said don't come home," I said to Marla. "You said Delaney didn't want me there. You were right. I didn't belong there. Because I belong here." I looked at Stanley. He was smiling at me, a fierce, proud smile. I looked at Diane and Frank. They were standing tall, my wall of defense. I turned back to the Watsons. "Get out," I said. I didn't scream it. I didn't cry. I said it with the authority of a woman who owns the building. "Garrett," I said. Garrett and 4 other guards stepped forward. They formed a wall. "Please escort the guests to their vehicle," Garrett said. Marla tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. There was no audience left to perform for. The jury had returned the verdict. Dennis put his hand on her arm, head bowed, and led her away. Delaney followed, her head high but her eyes darting around, realizing that for the first time in her life, she was the extra, not the star. The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. The room was silent for 1 more second. Then, Stanley walked over to me. He took my hand. He brought it to his lips. "So," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "who wants cake?" The tension broke. Laughter rippled through the room, relief, joy, the release of holding breath. The band struck up a fast, upbeat song. Frank popped a bottle of champagne. Diane hugged me so hard my ribs creaked. I looked at the closed doors one last time. The ghosts were gone. I turned around and walked onto the dance floor, into the arms of the family I had chosen, and who had chosen me back. The music was loud, the lights were bright, and finally, my table was full. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a journey sharing Isla's truth with you, and I truly hope it reminded you that you never have to settle for a love that hurts. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a quiet room in London, a busy street in New York, or maybe somewhere cozy in Hanoi? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, liking this video, and pressing that hype button so we can share this message of strength with even more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember to choose yourself.